water law and policy because we have such a mixed crowd here. And luckily there are two very simple little sayings that we have in water rights that if you know those two, give you about 75% of what it is. And so here in Montana we follow the prior appropriation doctrine, and our first little sing-song saying is first in time is first in right. And so what that means to us is that the water user with the earliest priority date gets to use water first before anybody else does. And if there's only enough water in the stream for one person, for that first user to get water, then they can take it all and they don't have to share it with anyone. And it doesn't matter what your purpose of use is, if you're irrigator or domestic use or industrial use or municipality, all those uses are treated the same. No one gets preference over the other. It's all according to priority date. And then the second little sing-song saying is use it or lose it. And there's two parts of that, and the first one is really use. That a water right is the right to use water. You don't actually own the water belongs to the state of Montana, but you have a protectable property right in the use of that water. And then use it or lose it, water's too important to let it just lie around, so if you're not using it, you have a potential to have that water right abandoned. And so, pretty easy. Those are the two main philosophies of water rights. Montana entered its more, I would say, modern phase maybe of water policy. It was all set up by the 1972 Constitution. We'll be hearing more about this. And then in 1973, the legislature passed the Montana Water Use Act, which really changed things around. And it divided, it's a bright dividing line between water rights. After July 1, 1973, you have to get approval from DNRC for a new water use. Before July 1, 1973, you could just get a shovel and dig a ditch and get a right. So, big difference between those rights. The other thing that it did was it set up an adjudication for all those pre-1973 water rights. Since you could just get your ditch and get a right, nobody knew who had which rights. And so that was also a big part of the 73 Water Act. Now, you'll be hearing more about that from the folks that actually put the system into place for us. This panel, I'm very pleased to be here with them because I have great respect for all these folks. And we're going to take a chronological view of development of water policy in Montana. And so we're going to start with Dorothy Bradley. Dorothy was first elected to the Montana House of Representatives in 1971. She served until 78, and then she left the legislature for a while and came back in 85 to 92. So she was there in the early days, before the Constitution was even adopted, and then in those rush of the first sessions where the legislature passed a lot of new acts in response to the Constitution. Her involvement in water issues has not stopped after she left the legislature. She worked at the MSU Water Center. She worked for the district courts in Gallatin County as a liaison on water issues, and she served on the Reserve Water Rights Compact. So please welcome Dorothy Bradley.
Thanks, Holly. It truly is a privilege to work with you because you have more continuity in all these decades than just about anybody I know. Zach Brown, are you here? So Zach, the reason I'm here is Zach Brown, all of our friend, invited me to come today, and he's going to be, we'll have words later. Of course I said yes, because I say yes to anything that Zach asked me to do. But I also said yes because at the exact time he called, I was reading this incredible article about Cape Town, heading for what they call day zero, which is this spring if the reservoirs keep going down, which means some 20,000 people will be going to fill their jugs in this civilized city at a water place where they will have armed guards to keep the peace. And I thought that is absolutely extraordinary. But is it really a surprise? This city just doubled its population in the last 2 decades. I mean, there were people there that knew this kind of thing would happen. This is a wonderful opportunity, a window of opportunity we have to work on these things. And I want to give you every bit of encouragement that I possibly can. I wanted to mention that in 1962, a Montana MSU geologist was published in the Science magazine about the finite quality of water, and that by the year 2000, we would experience water shortages in this globe that would affect our quality of life. That happened to be my father. So you can imagine the terror that my brother and I were raised in. We were trained to worry about droughts. And unless there was an inch of water in the basement and a lot of mold, you know, we were off the problem then for a couple of months. We had some respite, but that is how we were trained. But I wanted to mention that because as I look back over my 45 years of notes of water conferences and meetings and symposia, it has always been a sense to me that science is not something that we listen to. And I felt as I looked at all these notes that we have done some incredibly good things in the last 45 years while I've been around here. I was really encouraged, and I'm encouraged today. But what has discouraged me is I don't think we yet have a platform for our scientists. I don't think we yet are forced to listen to our scientists. I think there's an old adage that says only in politics are we allowed to negotiate the facts. And I would say only in politics now, these days, are we allowed to negotiate science. So since I am the older and go furthest back of legislative opportunities, I get to start. And I think sometimes that I might be the luckiest because I led my political experience in the decade in the 70s, we called the golden era of environmental legislation. Some people call it the Earth decade. I started that off myself. I was one of the organizers of Earth Day at MSU, and that was in 1970. And then for some crazy reason, right after it, capping that, I put all my stuff in a little tiny Volkswagen and drove up to Secretary of State and filed to run for the House of Representatives. You never know when these little things are going to bite you, but be ready. And so I was running for the legislature, and what I did is I campaigned around my home territory of Gallen Valley. It was multiple member districts then, and I had the whole valley to campaign. I gave out campaign litter bags. It says Dorothy is for the birds. And I still am. But on the back it has a whole bunch of environmental hints. And I was looking at this last night. Oh my goodness. I mean, some of them are really so apropos to today. This is 1970. Organic gardening. Bicycling. And then I have a couple of ones that really raise your eyebrows. It says, be conservative with soap. And there's another that says, have only 2 natural children. You know, when I was doing Earth Day, I had the opportunity to meet Gaylord Nelson, who was the U.S. Senator from Wisconsin who founded it. And one of the great things that he said is, if I had to say everything I believe, I probably couldn't vote for myself. And, you know, I didn't take that to heart. I said everything I believe, and then I wrote it down, and then I handed it out in my campaign. It's just a blooming miracle I was ever elected. So I get to talk about that exhilarating time in the early 70s, and there's a couple of things I want to leave with you. We were told to talk about water, but you can't pluck water out of everything else. Water is what it's all about. You can't pull it out. And as we think about that Earth decade, it's all about water. The results were absolutely extraordinary. And those of us who served then used to sort of tease Governor Tom Judge, who really deserves a lot of credit for his leadership. We call it his laundry list, and every time we listened to him give another talk, it was his laundry list about strip mine reclamation and hard rock reclamation and MIPA and taxing and reserving water and preserving records and recording and the right to sue and being held accountable. He had that laundry list down. Bing, 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 this is what my administration accomplished. It was all about water. I mean, we were talking about the Yellowstone River, and we were talking about the aquifer in the northern plains that was the coal seam that was being removed in the strip mining. I mean, that was news to all of us. We didn't know that. But I thought sometimes the message was missed in the laundry list as to what was really happening then. Because what I think was really happening then is that we, as a collective body in Montana, were considering the needs of the next generation. You know, we were no longer moving on to the next spot out there, but we were settling here because we loved it and everybody wanted to be here. And we were considering the needs of the next generation, and we were holding ourselves accountable across the ages. That was new. And I have asked myself, and did many times this past time as I was thinking, what did I get to tell you? What do I get to tell you about this period of time of productivity? How did it happen? And to me, not just as important as how it happened is how it ended. And I can't even tell you how it ended. But I'll tell you, those who are soaring through that decade thought this was the way life was. This is the way it was going to be from here on out. And it wasn't. You know? I don't know if you want to call it pendulum or what you want to call it. But what I have looked back to see in the decade of the 70s is what I call when the stars lined up. I think people today like to call it the tipping point. I don't like the tipping point because I like all those stars. And every single one of those stars was indispensable in my perspective. And they are all somewhat identifiable. I mean, first of all, there was the philosophy that was coming to our grasp. Aldo Leopold, who talked about the land ethic. Wallace Stegner, who it is said whose voice gave the West its sense of place. You've all read Stegner, and you know how that is. I'm going to keep this really short because I could write an essay on every single one of these stars. There was the history. K. Ross Toole, Richard Rader, just for example. And they helped all of us then understand why the West has a very unique relationship with the federal government and a very unique relationship with business. We were different then. And then there was the sticker shock. The sticker shock for all of us was the North Central Power Study and the Montana-Wyoming Aqueduct Study. And just sum it all up, it was like 40 plus thermal generating plants and diverting the Yellowstone and many dams. And and aqueducts and slurry lines. And I think what clinched it is that there was actually this term that was used that our beautiful Northern Plains would be a national sacrifice area. I think that clinched it. There was an extraordinary vision in that decade. You see it come forward in the Constitution. I mean, I don't know anybody else's state constitution that talks about grandeur and vastness and quiet beauty, and then gives people the right and the responsibility to clean environment. It was simply astonishing. Then there are the people. There are the people who came to office at that time and who ran. They talked about reclamation and siting and taxing bonds for mining, institutionalizing the right to know before the impacts are felt, like MIPA. And then this amazing number of water thoughts that were new to us, like leaving it in the stream is okay, and it's not so much a matter of regulating the fish by creel limits as the habitat and the physical stream and the water quality. I mean, there was just ideas to abound. But I want to tell you, there was people behind every single one of these ideas. I can't say enough for them. And if you ever think it was easy back then, it was not. They all worked into the dark of night to make these good things happen. And it's different today because of them. And I want you to be inspired by that, because what we all do truly makes a difference. They were so astonishing. And I don't hear their names anymore, but my God, they're etched in my heart, I tell you. And there's this a star that these get a little fuzzier, but I call it our identity. Our identity suddenly became that we were Westerners and Montanans. I cared so much more about people knowing I was a Westerner and a Montanan than they would ever know my name. That was who we were, and we were a collective group, and we were so thrilled that that's who we were. And here's another fuzzy one, but it's actually measurable. It is called trust. And I don't know how we're going to ever get it back. But trust in the 70s, 2/3 of the people trusted each other, and today less than a majority does. I mean, you can test this on the line that lines up at the grocery store at your grocery clerk. And then, you'd stand in line and chat, and you trusted each other. And now, people don't. And Montana is not separate in that sad category. We don't really either like or trust each other very much anymore, and it is the majority who falls below that line. And I'm not going to dwell on this because I could do it for an hour. I'm going to talk to you about the Great Debate. Because I listened to the ag people in eastern Montana about their national sacrifice area, about all the things we didn't know, about the aquifers, about the reclamation, about the dry nature of the prairie, all these things that we didn't know, I introduced a bill for a moratorium for 3 years. And we had what I would call the Great Debate. We had the Great Debate where it was not recorded in those days, it wasn't. But it was an incredible moment in the Montana legislature where everybody had their say, and it finally boiled down to a truly elegant speaker from Miles City who said, we need economic development out here. You West people who have everything, don't deprive us of this, Jim Lucas. And Great Falls, taciturn, thoughtful, brilliant lawyer John Hall, who said, I don't want to deprive Eastern Montana, but we have a moment in time where we can think about what we want to be in the future. I can absolutely dissolve on the time of that debate. And that's all I'll say to it, except that I talked a couple of years ago to a Billings legislator who was there at that debate. We're on opposite sides of everything, but we're good friends. And he said, I was so proud of that debate. He said, there were no games. It all came from the heart, and everybody stood up and said what they felt, and it was really an extraordinary moment. So I'm going to conclude this. I really wanted to also talk to you about the Water Use Act. When that passed, it was one of the spin-offs from the Constitutional Convention, that visionary document that we could learn so much from, including how they got it passed, which we're the only state that ever has. But the main thing I would say about the Water Use Act is, when I was involved in helping pass it, I was interested in records. You know, we wanted to have centralized information about our water so that downstream states couldn't grab it, and it would be more than just a shoebox full of index cards in every county building. It would be a centralized record. I never knew what it would come to at this point, but it's pretty impressive with maps and everything else. I'm very proud of that, but what really also came out of it was the right to reserve for future, where we actually had the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Division talking about something really new, like an in-stream flow for fish is an okay thing. And the Department of Health then in Montana was arguing that an in-stream flow to preserve the quality of the water and prevent the state from over excesses of pollution is an okay thing. It's an incredible story, but I don't need to tell you about it because you can go get Jim Pozowitz's book, and a warrior of that era who has just published a book called My Best Shot. Hopefully we can all give this thing our best shot. But I would say one of the most encouraging things to me about that era is that for 3 years, it was all about science. They got every fact and figure. It was about water biology and fisheries, and 3 years it was all about science so they could make their case. And just among other things, make a case not to build the Allen Spur Dam that's just south of Livingston. It's all about science. But don't kid yourself. On the shoes of that science came the most incredible thing that we are good at. It's called raw emotion. and people came out to talk. I mean, they had something they called the Concerto of the Yellowstone. They had some distillery in Kentucky or somewhere or other that developed Yellowstone mellow mash whiskey that sponsored reporters from all over the country going down the Yellowstone River when they figured out the leaves were most golden. There was a whole issue of Life magazine. So let's just remember, takes both. I love being here and seeing all of you so full of energy. Thank you.